Hey, peace. Welcome back to another episode of We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club. Happy New Year to everyone out there. Appreciate everyone tapping back in with us. I am Akimbo Ajore of We Charge Colonialism, the host of We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club. I'm here with my comrade. What's going on, brother?
Good morning, everyone. This is Frank, host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series. Welcome back this morning to the Saturday show.
Yeah. It's been weeks. I think we skipped December.
Yeah,
December we was going, but it was so much going on for the month of December. We decided to come back fresh in January, and Natasha, she's going to be joining us. Right, I shared the link in the chat, so Natasha should be joining us shortly as well. Also, we're going to be going live on Instagram. This will be the first time that we're live on Instagram, so people can tap in over there as well. And if you're on Instagram, definitely want to encourage you to come over, subscribe to the channel. We Charge Colonialism YouTube. Make sure you tap into us on YouTube as well. So we Charge Colonialism, an anti-colonial, a Pan-African anti-colonial think tank media platform. And we're here to counterbalance the colonial media. Oh, got a sister with us. Hey, welcome to the party.
Peace, everyone.
Hey, peace. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Peace, everyone. I am Natasha, and I am a community organizer, educator, student. I work with the Northeast Political Prisons Coalition.
Yeah, freedom all. Yeah. So we're back. As I mentioned just a minute ago, we are a Pan-African anti-colonial a think tank media platform, and during our podcast and book club, we usually cover news stories around the world as it pertains to the African experience. That is our focus, and we cover books put out by some of our great theorists and thinkers. So we like to examine those, especially as it pertains to our liberation and our advancement. So appreciate everybody for tapping in, but make sure that you like and share this podcast so that we can have as many people as possible tapping in. There's not many, platforms I think that's out there doing what we're doing. It's revolutionary, that's Pan-African to its core, and really touches on a lot of these important stories. When people talk about what's happening in Congo and what's happening in Sudan, like these are things we've been talking about these things for months. We've written stories on what's happening in these places, and not just those places. Ghana, what's happening in the United States, what's happening in Haiti, right? What's happening in Brazil, wherever African people are, we touch on those stories. So it's important that people are connected to what we're doing here, because I hear a lot of times, I'm pretty sure you guys hear it too, that hey, nobody's talking about what's happening in Sudan, and we turn around, we like, yo, if you tapping on Sundays, Frank, you be covering everything. So if people tapping on Sunday, it's like, yo, you don't have any excuses. Like, we're uplifting all of these stories. So we hope that you subscribe to the channel and share. Anybody want to say? I know it's been a minute. Anybody want to say anything before we tap into the first story?
I'm just, glad to be back. It's been a little while. Frank been holding us down on Sundays. Just looking forward to making, to having the time to make sure that we can be more consistent for you all, and bringing the news that, like Akimba said, not a lot of people are, it's not like a mainstream or popular media is, giving these stories, and they're things that we really need to know. So, just want to be able to give that on a consistent basis. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to add up, welcome back, welcome back. We are glad to start the 2024 very fresh and energetic. So again, tomorrow we're going to be here. And the topic for tomorrow it says Asia just admitted that Africa is next after Palestine and Gaza. They just admitted that Africa is next. So to those of you who call themselves Christian, praying for the Zionist nation, praying for the imperialists, okay, thinking that they are the true, how they call it, people of the creator of the universe, and sitting there praying for them, okay, keep praying for them, because after they are done with Gaza and Palestine, you're going to be next, okay, to come and destroy you and kill you, and they just admitted it, okay. So tomorrow we're going to be discussing that, okay. So Africa is next once they are done, because they are not going to let it go as easy. They're going to fight, okay. They're going to fight. If they lose, they lose. If they win, they win.
Yeah, appreciate that. Definitely tap in, be a part of that conversation. We're going to go into our weekly roundup, and then in the second half of our podcast, we're going to be covering The Revolutionary Path by Kwame Nkrumah, selection of his writings and articles. So looking forward to starting that book today. I think what we'll find in that book is a lot of the relevancy to what's happening now. And he was actually forewarning us when we get into this book, we'll see a lot of the things that Nkrumah was talking about. He was sort of predicting and telling us, hey, these are the things that the colonists are doing right now. And if we don't do anything to change it, what our future is going to look like. And so we're still dealing with colonialism, neo-colonialism today. So I think there's a lot that we can take from this book as far as detecting the problem and developing the proper, I think, solutions to solve the issues that colonialism brings upon African people. So yeah, peace to the chat. Who want to set it off? I'm gonna go. I can go second, so we can kind of like flip flop it. Did one of y'all want to go first with the story?
Yeah, I guess I can go first, since my story is on language and Burkina Faso, that when we talk about neocolonialism. So let me share my screen. Okay, let me get the window. Yeah, here we go. All right, so if you're seeing my screen, yeah, good. So my story is on how Burkina Faso abandons the French as an official language. And so I'll just show the video, and then I'll talk a little bit about it.
Burkina Faso's government on Wednesday adopted a bill revising its constitution to enshrine the country's indigenous languages as official ones in place of French. French, which has been the official language for over a century, has now been relegated to the rank of working language. The bill must still be voted on by the Transitional Legislative Assembly before being signed into law. The country's ruling junta came to power in a coup in September 2022, and earlier this year promised a partial modification of the constitution. It comes following months of worsening relations between France and Sahelian countries. Earlier this year, Mali also established national languages as official ones in the country's updated constitution, similarly removing French. Burkina Faso has steadily severed ties with France while deepening ties with Moscow. The country has also moved closer to neighboring Mali and Niger, with the three countries recently proposing an alliance of Sahel states.
So I wanted to point out this. I thought this story was important to talk about, specifically thinking about like those, countries that were colonized by France, that still use the French language, particularly thinking even about Haiti, and how for a long time French and a lot of these state nations where you had France as a colonizer still use French as the official language, or even ones where you have English as the official language where they had British colonizers. And the fact that this is a move to away from that, away from the colonial legacies of France and French thought, especially thinking about language. And I think one of the key things that they mention here, down here, is where they say the writing of a new constitution is a question of political, economic, and cultural sovereignty. No one can truly flourish from the concepts of others. So this idea, I think a lot of people need to understand or don't realize how language is directly connected to thought process and worldview and outlook, and how when you're using someone else's language, it directly connects to the type of thought process then that you are able to think about, things that you're able to conceive of, things that you're not able to conceive of, things that you're able to think about, because your language is part of your culture and it's part of that cultural ideology. And so moving away from, so it's not enough to just get rid of the colonizers' physical presence. But when we think about the quote that I think it was, I don't want to say the wrong person, but you remind me who it was. I'll say the quote, like the greatest weapon in the mind of the oppressed is of the oppressor is the oppressed. And so thinking
Biko,
about language,
Steve Biko.
yeah, Steve Biko, exactly. And so just thinking about language, there's that example right there, because when you're using someone else's language, they're still able to control your mind because they're controlling the kind of thoughts that you can have, the kind of ideas that you can have. And if anybody who studies language is able to, anybody who studies language will be able to tell you that, within languages, there are concepts that are not transferable, or there are things that are said that, aren't transferable to other languages because they are connected to a whole nother way of seeing and being within the world. And so I think, just kudos to Burkina Faso for, moving toward that step and being an example of what we must do as African people as we continue to really decolonize, right? Really throw off the chains and the fetters of colonialism. And I know that there's been also, a move in Haiti to move away from using French as the official language of instruction and to using Creole. And so that's still, something that's an ongoing process. And so I think this is also a signal to other countries within Africa that still even use English as their main language to go back to using, their national languages, as Burkina Faso has done. Because, a lot of these other countries will tell you, oh, well, we don't know which one to use because there's so many languages in there. But again, you're using the oppressor's mindset, you're allowing the oppressor to still have a stake in, a place within your mind, in the mind of your youth, when you're still using their language. So it's important for you to take these necessary steps and move away from using, colonial languages as your official language.
No, appreciate that. I mean, just a few things I thought about. Well, one thing was Julius Malema. I came across a clip of him talking about Kiswahili being a mandatory language that's taught in the schools of South Africa, and as far as I know, I think like some schools, at least I read that some schools were already teaching Kiswahili in South Africa, but I guess he was talking about making it sort of like a mandatory requirement to learn Kiswahili. And he got into the reasons why, as far as just a language that can be spoken about. I mean, sorry, a language that can be used to communicate with other Africans across the continent, rather than using the colonizer's language, because he understands the importance of not using the colonizer's language. And it's not to say that's the only language we can learn. Can learn other, whether it's Yoruba, other African languages as well. The point is having an African tongue used as African people to communicate with other Africans, rather than having to communicate with other Africans through the tongue of our oppressor. I think it's important. The last thing, as far as just like definition as well, because even with the language, and you touched on, the importance of having our own language, the definition that's behind these words that we're using, and also like what some of the words, what they imply. Like we have to, even with the English, us speaking English, there's a lot of words that we had to redefine because of the connotation that came with the word, such as, and I'll use colony for example. That was like a positive thing at one time for Europeans to have colonies, right? But they can't come out in the open and say that we have a colony now because of what that implies, right? Which is slavery, exploitation, oppression. And so they'll use other words like provinces and things like that, right? Territories, right? But these are still colonies, right? And so, but it took for, African people to like redefine what these words meant, and also the connotation of these words. And Huey P. Newton talked about the power to define phenomena, right? Is the ability, power. Power is the I forgot the quote. What is it? Power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a required in a applied manner. I still butchered it, but y'all get what I'm saying. I'm just happy to be back. But that's why it's important for us to have our language and define these words. Go ahead, Frank. You want to add on?
Yeah, man, exactly. One fundamental aspect of identity is language. That's the first thing. You can ask somebody from Spain, and they are not going to tell you I speak English or I'm English. They will tell you I am Spanish, because they speak Spanish, because that's where they're from. They identify themselves with the language, with the tongue they speak from. Okay. So if you ask somebody from England, they're going to say, I'm English, because that's what they speak. That's their identity. That's their tongue. Even in America, they will identify themselves as English because they speak English. All right. That's their identity. That is their tongue. All right. So you own it to yourself and not to anyone. All right. Because you are not carrying another person's identity. You are who you are. Now, with Africa, right? And again, that's one of the things. Most nations, okay, almost these other nations, that's why they are united. And that's one reason, again, Africa, we are not united, because we don't have a common identity. All right? Even though we live on the same continent, okay, in the same boundary, I'm not talking about colonial boundary, right? But because of that language, before we even come to the bolos, all right? But because of that language, is a barrier between Africans. Because of that language, is a barrier that is even making it difficult to have one currency as African, because we see ourselves as French, all right? We see ourselves as English, and some parts, not majority, as Dutch or Portuguese or German. Now, with those divisions, with those language barriers, how are we going to identify ourselves as one to even have one currency? Because the French will want to keep their currency, their CFA, right? And the so-called nation in Africa that speak English, they may want to keep their US dollar. They may have other local currency like the cedis in Ghana or in Liberia, like the local Liberian currency, but it is not valuable because we do not communicate in those dollars, in those cities. We do not communicate with it. Locally among us, we communicate with it, but internationally, we do not communicate with it among ourselves. All right. So we cannot use our cities to communicate with it in Liberia to buy goods. We cannot use our cities to communicate with it to buy goods in Nigeria. We only use it in Ghana. Okay. We only use a Liberian dollar, okay, to communicate with it in Liberia. If we want to communicate with goods and services in Ghana, then we have to use the cities. We have to use it, how to call it, the US in Ghana, okay? Or if Ghanaians want to use it, they have to use the US dollar to communicate in Liberia. So that goes even in Nigeria. So we use these currency. Again, that also linked to communication, all right? So we cannot use foreign dollar to communicate among ourselves. So communication or language by itself is also a code, okay? A code of identity. So by we using English, we are using the English people identity, their code. By we using or Spanish, they have a code that identify them. We are using it. So we are also saying we are Spanish. And to that extent, we will never ever want to disengage ourselves from people that speak Spanish or from the nation of Spain. We may not want to disengage ourselves from the nation of the English people. All right. And in that, we have no identity. We have no heavyweight. And that is why anytime we go on the national stage, we do not have heavyweight. They never come us. Look at the Chinese, right? They have a code. They are always identified because they have a heavyweight. They have identity. They have tones that they can speak with, okay? So we as Africans, the only way we can be liberated, okay, some of the way we can be liberated is not just through economic or political. It goes also through our common code of speaking, what we think, and, can unite, can bring us together, can identify us as one. And that is for one reason. And let me just make this even before I leave. And that will be also, I will elaborate that tomorrow on tomorrow's show. Now, I will tell you this. One of the reasons why the war in Gaza, okay, in Palestine, all right, that have gone this far and it's not going to stop, it's going to continue, all right, because the United States and Asia and other allies, they are vividly involved. And the reason to that as well, it comes back to Africa again. And that is why they say Africa is next. Because what they're trying to do here is, like I said, it's a war that they're going to fight because they know the end time for these colonialists, for the imperialists, is actually near, is actually close, is actually here. So what they're going to do, they are not going to give up, they are going to fight. So what they're trying to do here is, in their mind, if they can defeat the Arab nation, because right now, all the Arab League or the Arab Spring are actually uniting because of language. Again, we come back to language. Because of language, they have identified their common enemies and they know who their common enemy is. Again, that again go to language. All right. So they have identified that and they all are coming together to fight this one common enemy. Now, if this common enemy of the Arab Spring, of the Arab League, okay, succeed, what that means is we African, we already done. They already conquer us because we do not have army, okay? We are not united, all right? We don't have one common language that we can communicate through. We speak English some part, we speak Spanish some part, we speak Portuguese some part. We are not united, we are not family. So we will never come together as the Arab Spring, as the Middle Eastern nation that are coming together to fight their common enemy. And not only that, they are also sophisticated when it comes to weapon. All right, they build nuclear weapons, they manufacture their own weapons. We do not manufacture weapons. So when it said after they are done with the Palestinian and Gaza, Africa is next. These are the things they are talking about, because Africa is the hold. All right, Africa is the stronger hold to hold the nation, the world together. All right, and when I say to hold the world together, I'm not talking about their war. I'm talking about our war. All right, so if they can defeat those people, right, their war come back still, and our war will be destroyed. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about also tomorrow. Again, because we do not have language, all right, we are always defeated.
No, that's a fact. You had said something earlier too, as far as like with the currency, and I'm just thinking, like, if all the African nations were decided, and this is part of their plan, I think was it 2053, I believe. I have to go back and look at as far as the African Union. You're on mute.
I think they said 2060 or 2063. Yeah.
Okay. But the single currency, but just thinking with the resources that Africa has, that the world can invest, and they go to Africa for these resources. If they were to have a single currency, and in order for you to do business with Africa, you have to use that currency. I mean, just think about the power. And this is what Gaddafi, this is something that he was attempting to do, right? He was advocating this, right? They would be so dangerous if they can get on one accord and say, hey, this is the currency that we're using as an African nation, and they have the resources to back it. There's no nation, there's no country in the world that will be able to compete with Africa. They have the consumer. We're talking about 1 billion people, so you have the labor, you have the consumers, everything that you need is right there in Africa. But yeah, we can tap into your story, and I could talk about. I was just going to talk about the new Philly elect mayor, but I can talk about her another time. We're going to talk about neo-colonialism, but we could jump into South Africa, because I actually made a post on Instagram about this as well. Okay. On our We Charge Colonialism.
All right. So again, as we are saying, okay, and this story also go in line with what we just spoke about in terms of Natasha's story. All right. So this is why, again, so South Africa, as we all know the history of South Africa when it comes to apartheid, when it comes to the United States supporting apartheid or Israel against Africans, okay, or specifically South African, right? Again, the United States is also supporting apartheid Israel in Gaza and Palestine. So it is not a coincidence for the United States to come out at this time again to support apartheid Israel, okay, against or the Palestinian and the people of Gaza, when South Africa have taken the Zionist apartheid Israel to the International Criminal Justice or Criminal Court, right? Now, so the United States came out to say the allegation of South Africa against Israel is baseless, okay? It have no substance. Now, there is something that they are using in this article that I want to focus on, and I'm just going to take some time to read. Now, it says the Biden administration on Wednesday toured into South Africa for filing an application at the International Criminal Court of Justice to begin proceeding to declare that Jerusalem was violating its obligation on the 1948 Genocide Convention in its war against Hamas, following the Gaza ruling terrorist group murderer October 7 onslaught. Now, they use the word Hamas here, okay? They use the word Hamas to discredit South Africa's claim of Asia committing genocide against the people of Palestine or against the people of Gaza. So what America is trying to say here, Asia is now fighting Gaza or Palestine. Asia is fighting a terrorist group. But again, these terrorist group, so-called, if they are terrorists, they are fighting for the people of Gaza. They are fighting for the people of Palestine. They are fighting for their land. So now America is making a claim that Asia is not fighting Palestine, Asia is not fighting Gaza, but Asia is fighting Hamas. That's the claim they are trying to say here now. All right. So they are supporting Asia killing the innocent women and children in Palestine, in Gaza, but not Hamas. Now, UN, let's say U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby called South Africa's submission meritless, baseless, not substantial, no evidence. Okay, and again, I will use this article tomorrow, okay, to back off my claim of what they have against Africa when they also say meritless, and this go against the so-called African leaders. Tomorrow again is about the African leaders, right? Now they say counterproductive and completed without any basics, in fact, whatsoever. So this is where again, they don't see African claim anything Africans say against the Osar war or the imperialists or the colonizer or the Zionists, right? They don't see it as anything. Whatever. All right. Now, U.S. State Department spokesman Matt Miller noted that the U.S. is not seeing any act that constitute genocide by Asia in its war against Hamas. Again, you see, they keep using the word Hamas because they are turning Hamas as the terrorist group. So they are saying they are in Palestine and Gaza to fight this terrorist group called Hamas. That's their claim. All right, that is their claim. The same way the United States is claiming that Burkina Faso, the leader of Burkina Faso is a terrorist. The leader of Niger, they are terrorists. They are against democracy. That's the same claim they are using here. The same claim they are using in Africa, okay, to put African heads together to make ECOWAS to go against another African nations. That these people, they are undemocratic, so-called democratic, right? They are using the same scenario here that, okay, they are not fighting Palestine, but they are fighting Hamas. Now, the same way they take Hamas here, that's how they take Traoré or Burkina Faso or Mali, okay, or Niger as terrorists because they are against their interests. Now, bear in mind, they say when they are done with these people, Africa is next. Now, I don't want to go into depth until tomorrow. Now, they say genocide is one of the most heinous atrocities that any individual can commit. Those are allegations that should not be made lightly, Miller said, adding that the U.S. does not think South Africa's decision to pursue an ICJ probe was a productive step to take at this time. Again, it's English. That's their English, but at this time, they are also saying, okay, they are guilty. But at this time, the United States, Israel, they are fighting to gain back their position. They are fighting to gain back their power, their superiority. It's not approachable at this time to bring it out. Okay, again, I don't blame them with this statement. I blame the so-called African leader who always want to accept anytime the U.S. go on to the African continent to pour crime against African leaders. I blame these so-called African leaders who will honor the United States to take another African leaders to take them to the hedge for judgment. But here it is. South Africa carry a claim. Instead of Asia going to proof of self, guilty or innocent, the United States is already backing apartheid Israel, the killer Israel, okay, that your decision is baseless, even though there should be some factual information to it that crimes are being committed, innocent people are being killed, but not at this time should you bring it out. Now, there's something I want to read here. Okay, now they say here, Israel is not trying to wipe the Palestinian people off the map. Israel is not trying to wipe Gaza off the map. Israel is trying to defend itself against a genocide terrorist threat. Now, do you see how they flip the table around? Rather, they are saying Hamas is the terrorist, okay? Is a terrorist that is committing genocide. But vividly, what we are seeing from various media sources, that Israel is the one bombing and killing innocent Palestinians and people of Gaza, women and children. But do you see how they flip the table around? Now, I will take it out so I can give chance to you guys to contribute. So that is what's in there that I thought it was to bring it. But I'm going to elaborate this. I'm going to use this article tomorrow to back off my claim as well. But do you see the role of the United States? Do you see how they look at Africa? But I'm going to go depth in that tomorrow because of this so-called Negro Africa that we have on the African continent.
No, I think, you know, the comments Gregory Jones is making in the chat, I think speaks to what you're the point that you're making. You know, threat to settler colonialism anywhere is a threat to settler colonialism everywhere. And that's what it like really boils down to when it comes to the U.S. and their support of Israel's genocide. Israel. Let me say, Israel. I was going to say the Zionists, but one and the same. You know, but this is again, you know, this is an attack on a group of people. They're trying to, even if you say Hamas, at the end of the day, I mean, that's still people who represent a political formation in Palestine, a group of people who was elected by the people to represent them in office, you know, at the end of the day. And I'm not even going to get into like who even, you know, supported and put Hamas in place, because we can go to the U.S. and Israel, you know, as far as their funding and support of Hamas as sort of a counter group to Arafat and the PLO at one time. But that's a whole nother discussion. But with the U.S. is committing, has committed genocide. The U.S. is a settler colonial state. So it's going to support when it sees a genocide taking place, especially when it's against other African people or other, you know, non-European people, then they're going to support that because they're committing the same atrocities. I mean, the U.S., and we're not talking about the past, the U.S. today, you know, supports and commits through colonialism and imperialist policies, genocide, and is still oppressing and exploiting African people around the world. So, I mean, right here in the United States, you know, we can talk about that. But Natasha, you want to touch on something before we get into the book?
I would just add that, you know, in terms of thinking about the quote that you were mentioning before, in terms of reality, the shaping of reality. And I thought about, you know, the Wade Noble's quote that, you know, power is the ability to define reality and have other people respond to your definition as if it were their own. And so, you know, this idea that of what genocide is, that, you know, the U.S. and other U.S. allies and you know, Israeli allies, they're saying they get to define, you know, what genocide is, especially in the example that Frank gave. And I think that's such a clear example of that quote about power, define, and the ability to define reality, because them as colonizers, as imperialists, they say, oh, we get to define reality. Oh, Africans, you don't get to define what genocide is. You don't get to say what genocide is. we get to say what genocide is. And, you know, like Frank was pointing out, how that example flips it. It's like, oh, Africa, you're saying this is genocide. No, actually, it's not genocide. And actually, we say what the, you know, what Hamas or, you know, what the Palestinians are doing, that's genocide. And I even think, even looking here within the US in terms of shaping reality and shaping, trying to shape what, you know, the idea of what genocide is, the example with, you know, like the Harvard professor that's, you know, was being fired, the UPenn president that also was fired, all of that around this whole, you know, definition of an accusation of genocide that, you know, was being put forth within, you know, those congressional hearings, and, you know, what was being said is genocide, or whatever the case, you know, that they were putting forth. Again, creating and determining what reality is and having everybody else, you know, go along with it, and, you know, using that, you know, that colonial power. And it just goes to show and reinforce that colonization is still alive, because the fact that, you know, those who are the oppressors are the ones saying this is what the reality is, when they're the ones committing it and saying, well, no, that's not what actually is happening here. They're telling you not to believe your eyes, not to believe your common sense, to go against your own, you know, critical thinking, and to go against, you know, what you obviously see. And so, just, you know, just thinking about that, and adding that point on. And one last thing in terms of, you know, they always want to say, you know, at the end, after they've committed the genocide, then be like, oh, well, okay, yeah, I guess that was genocide. Sorry. But they want to do it first. They want to complete their act first, and then be able to go back and say, oh, sorry, we did
exactly. And that's what they said. South Africa, this is not a time for this.
Right, exactly.
You know, and it's crazy because, you know, when we look back at the history, European history, Euro American history, like they've committed genocide, the most heinous acts committed on the planet, you know, in the history of humanity, was committed by these people to prop up this system that we're a part of now. And a lot of these people who were leading the way are looked at as sort of like heroes and great historical figures, right? That we still learn about in class. I can remember, it's great. Like I vaguely remember in elementary school, I can't remember the context of everything, but names like Vasco da Gama, Amerigo Vespucci, you know, Christopher Columbus, the Nina, the Pinta, the Maria, like all of this stuff was being so romanticized. And I remember these names. These were names that was being told. Say that again.
I said, lift it up.
It was being lifted up. And it's like, and I'm in elementary, and I'm telling you, I remember these names from elementary school being taught these things, right? And when I get older and I'm reading about these people on my own and seeing, you know, Bartholomew de las Casas, another name, you know, like who these people really were, right? And conquistadors, what that really, you know, meant to be a conquistador, man, it's crazy. It's crazy. But again, it goes back to, you know, what you said, and I was saying it earlier about Natasha. I'm pointing it up, like Natasha, what you had said. It was Wade Noble's. That was the version of like Huey P. Newton. Huey P. Newton, he's saying power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner. So you got it that time. But yeah, it's very important for us to define our reality, because they won't talk about that as genocide. You know what I'm saying? They won't talk about that. You know, they can't escape slavery because it was on the books, right? they made it law. They codified that, so they can't get around that. But yeah, let's get into the book. We actually starting this book today, Nkrumah's Revolutionary Path. This book is is articles, speeches that were given in the last 2 years of his life. Kwame Nkrumah, he's going to transition in 1972. So we're looking at the last 2 years of his work compiled together in this book, Revolutionary Path. We're going to start with chapter 1. The link to did I put the link is in the description? Let me see if I think this is the link too, because I copied and pasted earlier. I think that's the link. That might be a link to something else. Let me take that. I don't even know. I think that might be the link, hopefully. But the link is in the description. And if you're on Instagram, I know at the top of the hour, the Instagram, it's the first time we've gone live on Instagram. But I think after the hour is going to cut off. We usually go an hour, but we might go just a little over. So you can come over to YouTube, and you should come over and subscribe to the channel as well. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get into this, get into the text. All right. So part 1, the struggle for national liberation. We're just going to go through some of the texts and have a discussion around it. So from the forward to the 1962 edition of Towards Colonial Freedom in 1942, when I was a student in the United States of America, I was so revolted by the ruthless colonial exploitation and political oppression of the people of Africa that I knew no peace. The matter exercised my mind to such a degree that I decided to put down my thoughts in writing and to dilate on the results of some of my research concerning the subject of colonialism and imperialism. My studies at the time, however, left me little time to devote to this work, and it was not until I arrived in London in 1945 and came face to face with the colonial question, experiencing firsthand the determination of worker and student bodies fighting and agitating for colonial freedom in the very heart of a country that possessed a vast colonial empire, that I was stimulated to complete this booklet. It was not really surprising that in spite of much effort on my part, I was unable to find anybody who would undertake to publish my work at that time. I managed to get a few copies printed privately, and these in turn were copied by mimeograph and other means and distributed to those actively engaged in the freedom movement of Africa. But it was not until 1962 that the work was published in London. It was printed exactly as it was originally written. No changes or corrections were made, and nothing was added or taken from it. The views I expressed then are precisely the views I hold today concerning the nature of imperialism and colonialism. Furthermore, most of the points I made then have been borne out to the letter and confirmed by subsequent developments in Africa and Asia. There is, however, one matter of which my views have been expanded, and that is regarding African unification. When Towards Colonial Freedom was written, my ideas on African unity, important even as I considered them at the time, were limited to West African unity as a first step. Since I have had the opportunity of putting my ideas to work and in the intensification of neo-colonialism, I lay even greater stress on the vital importance to Africa's survival of a political unification on the entire African continent. Regional groupings, especially when based purely on economic cooperation in areas which are already dominated by neo-colonialist interests, retard rather than promote the unification process. We have read articles, papers, pamphlets, and books on the subject and are wary of the platitudes of their authors and distortions of facts. We have written as we see the facts and are indebted to no one but our own conscience, quickened by the rich revolutionary heritage of historical epics. The point of view maintained in this pamphlet stands in an uncompromising opposition to all colonial policies. It exposes the inherent contradictions between 1, colonial labor and capital investments in the colonies, between 2, the financial monopolist combines in the imperialist powers and the unquenchable thirst for colonies and the national aspirations of the colonial peoples, and between 3, the state policies of the colonial governments and the practical application of these policies in the colonial areas. Those who formulate the colonial issue in accordance with the false point of view of colonial powers, who are deluded by the futile promises of preparing colonial peoples for self-government, who feel that their imperialist oppressors are rational and moral and will relinquish their possessions if only confronted with the truth of the injustice of colonialism, are tragically mistaken. Imperialism knows no laws beyond its own interests. Right, and that was written in 1947. That was 1947. That's deep, man. No, this couldn't. But he's talking about. I'm a little confused right now, but it says London, October 1947. So I'll leave it at that. He wrote this in 1947. Any thoughts on that? Particularly, like, I wonder if you have any thoughts on what he said about the West African unity before the entire continent of Africa. And then he says something about economic cooperation as well, that, we can point to these, what are they, like ECOWAS, these regional economic committees, not committees, but formations, you know what I mean? But any thoughts on that? Because I think he kind of called the contradictions with those back then.
I did have a thought in terms. I had a thought on two things, but in terms of the one around where he makes the statement at the end of toward the end of page 14, at the last paragraph before it says towards colonial freedom, where he talks about regional groupings. And I think he said based purely on economic cooperation, in which areas are already dominated by neocolonial interests, retard rather than promote the unification process. And, I know there's the 5 regions of the continent, and then, there's the 6th region that they, the diaspora, thinking about like the African Union and, how they look at the different regions. And, I think we were having a conversation before Ikemba, where we were talking about like borders, how African countries can, operate without these colonial borders, how, in terms of thinking about Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger right now, looking across and looking to each other to look beyond these colonial borders that they've been creating. And so, just thinking about that example and thinking about, how as a continent, because I think that, we can look at China and say like, China's unified, but China's just a country. It's not a whole continent. Like, Europe is unified, but Europe is not really a continent. Those countries, like, yeah, when you look on the map and it says like, okay, yeah, Europe, the continent. I don't, that's another European, like the map of the world, right? Is based on Europeans' visions and views of the world, because the fact that you can look at Africa as a continent and then Europe, when you look on the map, is a continent within itself is strange, because when you look at that little piece that says like, oh yeah, this is the continent of Europe, but so just thinking about like, even, thinking about like France, England and, those, European nations, Spain, all of those ones in that, what, the so-called European continent, that's also like, that is a fraction of the whole of the African continent. So when we're thinking about like unification of, Africa and how that might work, and thinking about regional groupings, thinking about, these 5 regions and how, because it's such a large continent, how would, I don't think it could just be, you just have, okay, every country, they come together in this kind of way, or, however, they look at the borders, that the way that they see themselves outside of colonial borders. But I'm thinking of a way that would make it more, I'm thinking that the regional groupings, in terms of like, even when Frank was talking about the monetary system, right? Like for a whole huge continent like Africa to have like one monetary system, I think would be a challenge, because I think of just the sheer size of the continent. But I think having regional, monetary systems that connect that connect Africa in that way might be working. But like he was saying, not purely based, because he says, purely on economic cooperation, where it would have to be more than just economic cooperation, because we also know that the peoples and cultures within these colonial boundaries are off. Like, you have peoples whose histories and cultures connect across different quote unquote countries in Africa. So you would have to think, beyond just the economic cooperation, but like, a larger type of cooperation where you can structure it in a way that, you're able to have this cooperation across such a vast and large continent. And I think that's one of the things to think about when we're thinking about, African unification, as he talks about on the continent, that, as much as we can see examples of, European solidarity, Asian solidarity, those things are a fraction, literally a small fraction of the size of the African continent. So I was just thinking about that when, when he makes this statement about regional groupings.
But I think he does say there's a lot, but I just want to say the part though when he says in areas which are already dominated by neo-colonialist interests, how it retards rather than promotes the unification process. Yeah. And so what happens is that these neo-colonialists or colonialists that are still there, they undermine unification because the interest becomes self-interest. They become interested actors, right? And they align their own pockets and their constituency, right, against the interests of African people, which benefits the Europeans, the colonizers who are exploiting the resources. And so that's what happens. But Frank, you wanted to add on?
Yeah, I mean, we are almost all the time, but let me just add something. You see, there's an African proverb or parable that says, if they identify someone of a death, right, and you went to see this person and you found out that where this person died, right, around this person, they have food, any kind of food, whatever fruit, any kind of food, all right, is there. But you found out that this person died. And then comes to think about it, they said this person died of hunger. You will never believe it that this person actually died of hunger because this person lived in food. How can this person die of hunger when they live in food? What does that mean? Is ignorant. And I think that is what also Nkrumah was talking about here. How can you live in food and die of hunger? Now, in connecting that, somewhere in the passage that he mentioned something about colonialism, capitalist, and all those things, right? Now, these capitalists use their economic power in Africa for some African leaders to go against their own interests. Now, how can we live on a continent full of abundant resources, full of mineral resources, food, land that you can plant anything and grow, and we starve from starvation, we die from starvation, and then we depend on outside nations who do not have soil to grow food, who do not have resources. They depend on our soil as we speak. In Africa, in Liberia, the Chinese pick the soil in Liberia and ship it in China. All right? So how can we have these things to our disposal and we depend on China for rice when they are taking our soil, taking it to China to grow rice because our soil have a mineral or fertilizer in it and they use it to grow food and then send it to us? How can we be that ignorant and depend on them? How can we be that ignorant to allow America to come to Africa? All right. Now, and when you talk about the regional issue, right, where we have some people in there because of their colonial influence, They are being used by the colonizer to go against other African or other area who are not controlled by the colonizer. For example, as we see right now in Burkina Faso, all right, and Mali and Niger, that to some extent it is being controlled by African, right? But where the colonizer control, like Ghana or Nigeria or Africa, Benin, okay, they are being used to go against those people. They are using African organization like ECOWAS to go against those people. Knowingly, the only reason why they are doing that is because they want the African resources. The same resources Burkinabes, the Nigerian, the Malian are fighting for to control for their people. The Europeans are coming for it, right? Using these same people to go against their own brothers and sisters. And that is what Nkrumah is talking about. How can they use crumbs, give it to you, to go against your own people when they are coming for your resources that they are taking, okay, to make money out of. And then they are using these same resources, getting crumb and bringing it to you.
No, indeed. And we're going to pick up, man. I wish we had more time. I think next week when we do this, we're going to start around 10:20 on the book. We're going to start a little early. We got late at a late start with the book, but the link is in the description. We're going to continue where we left off at in the revolutionary path. But I want to encourage everyone to read ahead. Continue to read as much as you can. We'll probably spend the next 3 weeks covering this book before we move on. But it's definitely a powerful read, and I think it's relevant to what we're experiencing right now in regards to colonialism. Appreciate everybody for tapping in. The live, when I created the live on Instagram, because it cut off after an hour, I checked. But when I created the live on Instagram, it said that I guess it was the AI that said it's going to ask Instagram to consider letting it go over the hour. So I'm just imagining AI having a conversation with another AI, like, hey, the other AI just like, no, we're not going to do it. That's why I appreciate everybody though for tapping in. We'll be back next week at 10 a.m. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Frank is definitely going to be covering the topic of what Israel has planned for Africa, and it's part of the old plan, right? They got a new plan. And this Tuesday at 9 p.m. I'll be discussing chapters 3 and 4 of Blueprint for Black Power. So definitely tap in Tuesday. So subscribe to the channel so you know what we have coming up. Again, appreciate y'all. Peace. And make sure you join organization. Make sure you continue to organize and advance the struggle for liberation for African people everywhere. Power to the people.
Peace.